1970 was an interesting year for America. Apollo 13 splashed down. The Beatles broke up. Across the seas, the Vietnam War was raging, while in the streets at home, protests were also raging. While America had its eyes focused on Europe, Russia, and Vietnam, things were heating up in the small Latin American country of Chile. 1970 was a Chilean election year, and like all election years, political tensions were high. Salvador Allende wins the election as the first ever democratically elected socialist. But his reign would not last. 3 years later, a militaristic coup overthrows him and places into power dictator Augusto Pinochet. We explore America's economic interests in Chile, their covert actions, and the lasting effects of those actions on the small country of Chile. Tonight, on Secret History.
Chile held its election on September 4th, 1970. As the winner of the people's vote with only 36.2% of the population, Allende was to be confirmed by Congress on September 20th. Dr. Salvador Allende was a socialist who wished for sweeping economic reforms, many of which could have hurt the U.S. interests. This was his first mistake as far as the Nixon administration was concerned. His second was being democratically elected, which was seen as setting a precedent for other countries, such as Italy, so that they could attempt to place socialist in their government as well. Not even a week after the general election, however, a meeting of the 40 Committee was called. The 40 Committee, a group of people from the executive branch, whose job was to review and approve covert action, spent this initial meeting discussing the chance of Allende taking the presidency and what, if anything, to do about it. While the committee opted to wait for more intelligence to decide a plan of action, President Nixon had already decided that he had to save Chile, no matter the cost. His plan of action? Make the economy scream. This sentiment was repeated again and again in 40 committee meetings, as well as in memorandums sent from Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to President Nixon, directing him that a peaceful agreement was not an option. If peace wasn't an option, then the 40 Committee was left with two routes. Track 1, overt, direct hostility. Direct intervention, direct the fate of the country with a heavy hand. Option 2, covert, destroy the economy, strengthen their military, plan a coup. While the second was the preferred method, several things stood in their way. Most importantly, a military that was truly loyal to the state and to the president, whomever he may be. To deal with this issue, an attempted kidnapping of General Rene Schneider was pursued 4 days before the congressional approval of Allende. However, this attempt ultimately led to his death, and a strengthening of loyalty to Schneider's idea. Thusly, Allende was sworn into office on November 6th, much to the despair of his opponents in America. 3 days later, the National Security Council met, and Nixon reaffirmed his point that a socialist government in Chile could not coexist with America, and that America would do all it could to remove Allende from power. Over the next 3 years, these orders were carried out with the economy placed under severe pressure from American businesses, the copper mining businesses being damaged through the inflation of prices caused by America, and Americans assisting in the training of Chilean military. Conditions in Chile worsened, and poverty grew under these pressures.
On the heels of social unrest from anti-Marxist groups that had been vocally against President Salvador Allende because of deteriorating social conditions for the middle and lower classes, on June 29, 1973, a group of rebels tried to take control of the presidential palace and defense ministry. Armed with tanks and machine guns, they killed 22 people and wounded 32 others, mostly civilians. Film from a Swedish cameraman that was killed in the June 29th rebellion was eventually uncovered and used in court-martials. Rebels began their assault at 9 a.m., but after a few hours the rebellion was over and they eventually surrendered to the army's commander-in-chief, General Carlos Gonzalez. Allende tried to play down the unsuccessful coup attempt, but still declared a state of emergency in Chile that would last until July 4th. But after the failed coup died down, the troubles didn't stop for Chile and Allende. He had a small win on July 1st when a group of Chilean miners went back to work after a 10-week strike. This didn't help the falling economic conditions. The strike had caused an estimated $70 million for the country. While he tried to bring unity to the country to stop what he believed to be the brink of a Chilean civil war, his right-wing opposition refused to believe it. Allende proposed a 90-day state siege to bring the country stability, but he was ultimately voted down, citing that the current state of emergency granted the president already enough power. Most of Allende's cabinet resigned in early July, and they made plans to exclude positions for the military in his cabinet. The new positions would be filled by civilians, although this would not last. By early to mid-July of 1973, inflation and the cost of living was still on the rise. Over the previous year, the cost of living had gone up 235%. This, paired with the shortages in basic goods and food for civilians, the Chilean people, especially those in Santiago, were becoming uneasy with the Allende administration. Government control over some foreign-owned factories had started in June, but by mid-July, more factories, including AGA and Cummins Diesel, were brought under Chilean control to help relieve some of the stress on the economy. In late July, the violence struck again when Allende's chief military aide, Captain Arturo Araya, was assassinated by gunmen on the balcony at his residence. This added another element of unrest in the intense political battle between Allende's Marxist government and his right-wing anti-Marxist opposition. It is believed this assassination was committed by the same rebels from the June 29th attacks. Besides the increased violence, Chilean economy was thrown into further disarray when the nation's truck drivers went on strike. This severely cut off lines of supplies to Santiago specifically, but to all Chile as well. While the strike didn't have implicit political goals, it mirrored one from October 1972 that sought to get military leaders in Allende's cabinet. On August 3, 1973, Allende's full cabinet resigned after the trucking strike began, but he refused their resignations. His opposition was calling once again for military involvement in the cabinet. On August 8th, Allende caved and brought in heads of the Army, Navy, and Air Force into the 15-member cabinet. The increasing violence and opposition essentially forced his hand to prevent what he still believed to be a looming civil war, although this did not stop the truckers' strike, and conditions in Chile fell further. Through mid-August, the trucking strike continued to wage on. This was causing dire economic conditions in Chile. Farm production was a fraction of what it used to be, and hundreds and thousands of employees were looking at layoffs from work. Allende tried to relieve economic strain by announcing that he would begin to seize any truck. This sparked even more protests from the wives of the truck drivers, who were eventually dispersed by the national police with tear gas. The lines drawn between the left and right were becoming more defined as the days went on. While President Allende was speaking on television, power was suddenly cut off to all of Santiago and other major cities. Allende attributed this blackout as a fascist attack against him. By late August, things were not looking good for Allende or his administration. Defense Minister Carlos Gonzalez stepped down from his position as the Army Commander-in-Chief due to pressure from the opposition. Allende made a last-ditch effort to appease them by appointing more military leaders to the cabinet, including General Augusto Pinochet as Minister of Defense.
Not 3 weeks later, the Chilean military, under the control of Augusto Pinochet and his militaristic junta, seized power from Allende on September 11th of 1973.
So the day of the coup, people went to work like 9/11 happened. Yes, people went to work normally, to school. They carry on with their life. Nobody really saw it coming. And then the military mobilized. They blocked all the major streets, and they started telling people to go back home.
By 8 o'clock a.m. on September 11th, 1973, the military had begun to take control of the country. By 9 o'clock, President Salvador Allende understood that his military had betrayed him in full. As bombs rained down on his palace, Allende began his final speech. Shortly following his speech, Allende was found dead, apparently of suicide with an AK-47, given to him by friend Fidel Castro. Among many locals, the death is still believed to be an assassination, despite official reports. General Augusto Pinochet, the Minister of Defense that was granted the position only 2 weeks earlier, took power, starting his 27-year dictatorship. From the moment Pinochet took power, he began suppressing opposition throughout the country.
Again, I was a kid, so I don't remember much of it. But I remember hearing my parents always talking about the kid too, the college kid who never came home.
The police and military would use violence and force to suppress all opposition throughout the country.
One day, my brother and I were coming home from school, and there was going to be a protest that night. So the military started getting ready for that ahead of time. They were all hiding in the bushes. It was a divided street, with like a garden in the middle, and we didn't see anything. But then my mom was like telling us, hurry home, and we were like a block away. And then out of nowhere, a gas bomb landed on my brother's legs. So we kind of picked him up and kept running and running and running. And when we got our throats were we were choking up and our throats were closing up. And my mom took like little bits of salt and put it under our tongues, and that kind of made it better.
The Pinochet regime was marked by violence and murder. Fear took hold of the country as opposition leaders, protesters, and former Allende supporters began to disappear, never to be seen again. As time went on, it became public knowledge that people who disappeared were often either being tortured or killed.
My mom tells me this story of when she was coming home one day, and there's a river that crosses the city of Santiago. That river, like once in a while, like the bottom of the river gets loose, and it's like the red clay is out. So every other in the river would change colors, right? So they were in the bus, and the bus just happened to like stop in the at the bridge, and then people started looking over they were looking at the water. Somebody made the comment of, "Hey, the river's coming out red. It's not the season yet." As they're like waiting for the traffic to move on, then the bodies start like floating down the river to the point that the whole river just turned red and the bodies were just floating down the river. Then a jeep with like military people showed up, and they were like, "Nothing to see here, move the fuck alone," and para que le hubiesen cambiado así todo el color.
The 1973 coup left not only scars on the country, but also on the Chilean people.
Otra de las cosas que, and I remember walking on the side of the palace, and I remember seeing the bomb holes in the walls. They've been patched, kind of poorly patched up with like stucco, so like concrete, that filled up. And I remember as a kid, I remember asking Mom, "What are all those things on the wall?" And my mom is like, "Don't point, don't look," and you know what I mean? Like it wasn't allowed. But if you walked all the way around it, you could see. I remember seeing like the patches of the aftermath.
Pinochet has been out of power for almost 2 decades now, but still, at Chilean soccer games in the stadium, 2 minutes of silence are held for the people who were murdered there. To this day, anti-American sentiments courses through the Chilean people because of bloody rivers, salted tongues, and the fact that they never got a choice to choose their president.